Hey, how's it going guys? It's Nate here, and welcome back to another Elder Scrolls investigative video. Now, I don't think I'd be breaking any ground by saying Skyrim is a game which features a lot of varying locations. There's cities, caves, islands, even godly dimensions beyond the primary mortal realm. However, one of the locations that has always particularly stuck out to me is the Dwarven ruin of Kagrenzel. Located right on Skyrim's eastern border with Morrowind in the Velothi Mountains, Kagrenzel is a place you may have never even visited, as it's not featured in any of the game's quests, nor even mentioned in dialogue. In many ways, it's almost like a filler dungeon. Although, those who have actually ventured there can attest, it's in reality an incredibly strange place that offers a few, shall we say, unique quirks that make it stand out. And when we assess the broader context of the Elder Scrolls' lore, it becomes obvious that Kagrenzel is likely more important than its place in Skyrim suggests, and could even help us get a bit closer to figuring out why the dwarves vanished in the first place. In previous list videos, I've briefly touched upon Kagrenzel before, but time restraints forced me to skip over some stuff. And there's been some interesting discoveries which complicate things even further. Definitely worth diving into. So, in today's video, I'd like to explain everything that we know to be going on, to analyze all of what makes Kagrenzel so weird. And from there, look into other sources, like what we know from previous Elder Scrolls games, as well as Skyrim's own game files, to hopefully connect many of the dots. We're not going to quite answer every question we have, but we will offer the most encompassing picture possible and propose some fun theories. Anyway, without any further ado, let's do further and figure out what the heck is going on with Kagrenzel and how it might be related to the disappearance of the Dwemer. Let's begin by quickly running through the area. As mentioned, this location isn't featured in any quests, so the only way to come across it is if you just happen to be wandering around the eastern edges of Skyrim's map. Nonetheless, here it is, just lying on a cliff in the snow-capped mountains. Inside, though, things start to get interesting. You see, Kagrenzel's initial interior features nothing but a large room, with a weird glowing orb atop a pillar in its center, with some dead bandits around it. When the orb is approached and interacted with, a cage will immediately draw upon the player, and all of a sudden the object will take flight and start hovering around us in circles, almost like it's examining the Dovahkiin. Eventually the ball of light will go away, but the floor beneath us will flip over into a subterranean tunnel that will start following through. This is, in fact, the largest possible fall offered in the entire game, and it leads us to safely land in a large pond, within a massive dome-like cave. Take a look around. The place we've fallen into is humongous, and could easily fit 50, maybe 100,000 gallons worth of volume. Heck, if I didn't know any better, I'd assume that maybe the dwarves were using this place for water storage or something. Anyway, let's just pause our journey right here, because there are some important things I want to point out and elaborate. That device, the orb and whatnot, it's unlike anything in any other ruin, and seemed to be a security mechanism of sorts that was looking for something about us, and trying to decide if we should be dropped down. The orb must have subjected those nearby dead bandits to the same test. However, rather than let them down, it murdered them to death for some reason. Why? Maybe we were allowed through because of our dragonborn nature? But why would the dwarves have cared about that? Furthermore, and this is even more alarming in my opinion, the tunnel we fall down is lined in various areas with giant, non-human bones. Huh? What beasts did these belong to, and how are they here? This is only made weirder by the fact that if we decide to open up our local map in the bottom of the cave, we'll find painted into said map various images of enlarged animal bones. Here they are again. Oh my. Now, bear in mind, Skyrim's local maps were all hand-drawn by the game's artists, so these were intentionally sketched in. and no other ruin maps have similar features. Kagrenzel is the only place said bones appear. So, between the local map and the remains we find within the tunnel, I think it's fair to say Bethesda's clearly hinting at some ancient creature of sorts having been here at some point in time. But more on that later. For now, let's just hurry up and finish exploring the dungeon, because frankly, we're almost done. After we've landed in the cave, all there's left to do is swim to the shore and start navigating your way through a claustrophobic, yet short tunnel. Along the way, the Dragonborn will be ambushed by various Falmer assailants, who have taken up residence here, and don't like trespassers. Note that as we progress through this tunnel, we can occasionally hear a very loud rumbling noise, and I'm not exactly sure what it is. It very well could just be noises being made by the Falmer as they navigate through rocks and push them down to jump down and attack us, or it could be something darker. We're unsure. Nonetheless, the tunnel will eventually lead us into a secret entrance into Stony Creek Cave, a large cave that's actually inhabited by bandits. All we need to do now is fight through the bandits, progress through the cave, and we'll finally make it out into the outside world. And thus, your Kagrenzel experience is over. That's the entirety of the dungeon. Okay, so what was going on? What were the dwarves doing here? Why set up that secret device? What were those bones supposed to represent? And what the heck was the rumbling sound? Well, let's start by talking about the bones, because already we can draw some interesting conclusions by just looking at the game files. According to Skyrim's creation kit, the various enlarged bones we see across the tunnel we fall through are in reality just enlarged mammoth abdominal skeletons that Bethesda upscaled the size of by about 3 times. So is that what Bethesda was trying to communicate? Is Bethesda suggesting there were giant mammoths buried beneath this ruin at some point in time? Well, maybe, but I wouldn't bank on it. It's very likely that Bethesda didn't mean to actually represent that, and they were simply using the mammoth abdominal bones and changing them up a little bit to represent an entirely different creature. I think this is especially likely given the fact we don't find any mammoth skulls here either. You would think if there really were mammoths buried beneath Kagrenzel, we would find their skulls too. So, if not giant mammoths, what were these things? Well, one theory we've discussed before is that the bones could have belonged to snow whales. Snow whales, for those of you who don't know, are allegedly a now seemingly extinct species of flying whale that once dominated the skies of northern Skyrim. However, were hunted to extinction by Nords sometime thousands of years ago in the Merethic era. Whether or not snow whales definitely existed is still a question that's being debated by the community, as they're only briefly mentioned in like 1 or 2 questionable books, and some fanfiction written by a former Bethesda writer that's not considered canon. But hey, maybe it was snow whale remains that we found down here. Heck, given the gigantic dome and nature of the cave, maybe the dwarves were keeping a bunch of flying whales here and farming or breeding them for some purpose. There's certainly more than enough space for flying critters. It's a hilarious theory that I would really love to be true. The only problem here is that Bethesda already has a whale skeleton model and texture that they've used in another place. In Sovngarde, there's a gigantic whalebone bridge that links the Hall of Valor to the rest of the realm. If the developers were really trying to represent whalebones in Kagrenzel, why not have just used that mesh and texture and downscaled it as necessary? It doesn't add up, and maybe what we're looking at just really belonged to some extinct creature that we're not meant to know anyway. Similarly, I also decided to search up the orb in Skyrim's creation kit and see what we could find. And frankly, there's not much. Apparently its name in the files is Orby, which is kinda cute, and it's actually using the model and texture for a healing spell effect. But beyond that, there was no information of note. Alright, so far we've elaborated on Kagrenzel's mysteries and explained some vague but unlikely possibilities. Though, we've gotten no closer to actually answering any of the questions, and have no concrete answers for what the dwarves were really doing down here. Remember, earlier in this video, I promised this place could be of extreme importance, possibly with a connection to the very disappearance of the dwarves in the first place. When are we gonna get to that stuff? Well, let's start to talk about Kagrenzel's name, and what it means. Kagrenzel, like all Dwarven ruins, is a Dwarven name. And while we have a far from perfect understanding of the Dwemer language, we can translate a good bit. We know the term Zel means city, or land of, when used as a suffix, kind of like the Greek word poli. So, Kagrenzel means the land or city of Kagren. Okay, well, what does Kagren mean? There are two really big possibilities that I want to dive into, and they're both very significant. The first is that Kagren means music, so this would be Music City. I'll get into why we think Kagren might mean music in a second here, but first I want to explain why such a name would be such a major deal. You see, the dwarves didn't think of music in the same way we humans do in the modern world. The Dwemer thought of music and sound not as a source of entertainment, but as a mechanism to manipulate the very fabric of reality itself. We call this concept tonal manipulation. Tonal manipulation is how the Dwemer achieved virtually everything they're known for today. It's what's behind their greatest scientific advancements. Their machines, their factories, their weapons and armor were all made possible not by magic. In fact, the dwarves were actually philosophically disgusted by normal magic, but by leveraging sound and music to do their bidding. So, by naming a place Kagrenzel, Music City, they were clearly attaching a special significance to this location that no other place was bestowed. Perhaps Kagrenzel was a center of Dwemer tonal research and studying, or a place where they conducted various experiments. Now, the reason we believe Kagren does indeed translate to music is thanks to a tablet players can find in Markarth. In the capital of the Reach, there's an old man named Calcelmo, who's paid by the Jarl to do nothing but study Dwarven society. And in Calcelmo's laboratory, he has an ancient Dwemer tablet, with a Dwarven paragraph sketched into it. For a while, players had no idea what this tablet said, as it was all written in Dwarven. However, a Bethesda Game Studios writer later translated it and offered it online. I'd read the whole translation to you, but it's like really long. Essentially, the tablet tells the tale of the dwarves accepting the Fulmer Inn. Anyway, in the author's translation, every time the word Kagren is brought up, he uses the word music, which indicates that is the translation. Now, it's not perfect, this is only one instance of the term being used, and we don't know what grammatical influences might have on its meaning, but it seems relatively solid. Now, the other possibility is that Kagrenzel wasn't named after music, but instead after an ancient Dwarven scientist named Kagrenac, and this is really the city of Kagrenac. In case you're not familiar, Kagrenac is probably the most, or in the very least, one of the top 2 most important dwarves ever, and he is largely considered responsible for the disappearance of the Dwemer in the first place. The story goes that Kagrenac was perhaps the greatest master of tonal manipulation in the world. He was the best at it. And, just prior to the disappearance of the Dwemer, Kagrenac was working on constructing an interesting device. A massive robot called the Numidium. The Numidium was so incredibly powerful, Kagrenac thought himself not of building a robot, but an entire new god. And this entire device would be powered with an ancient artifact known as the Heart of Lorkhan. This was a rock found buried deep beneath the Red Mountain that was believed to have incredibly powerful properties. Like, this very well could have been the most powerful thing in the world, and it's what Kagrenac wanted to use in the Numidium. Unfortunately for Kagrenac, The Chimer, or the precursors to the Dark Elves, as well as the Nords, found out about his plans and demanded he stop. He refused, and thus the Dwemer had to go to war with most of their neighbors. During this conflict, Kagrenac was working tirelessly on the Numidium, trying to finish the project. However, in the middle of the conflict, specifically at a battle that was occurring at the Red Mountain, all of a sudden, the dwarves just disappeared at once. And that was it. It's generally accepted that Kagrenac must have did something, possibly by accident, that was responsible for the disappearance of the Dwemer. It was all his fault. We of course still don't know where they went or what happened to them, but Kagrenac is the culprit most suspect. In fact, during the events of the College of Winterhold questline in Skyrim, we meet a professor named Arniel, who we can help recover some of the tools Kagrenac was using to work on the Heart of Lorkhan and the Numidium. And Arniel very much believes the theory I just mentioned, that he was responsible for the Dwemer disappearance. So, maybe Kagrenzel was Kagrenac City. Maybe this is where the man lived, or this was the man's laboratory. Or maybe this is where he was storing the Numidium itself. Despite the extensive amount of lore we know about him, there's also a surprising amount of information we don't know about Kagrenac. Namely, which dwarven city he lived in. We're unsure if it was in Morrowind, in Skyrim, in the Velothi Mountains. The game doesn't specify. Well, none of the games specify. We additionally don't know where the Numidium was stored. According to legend, sometime after the Dwarven disappearance, the Numidium was located somewhere by the leaders of Morrowind, who kept it for themselves until Tiber Septim demanded he give it to them, which they did, and then he used the device to conquer the rest of the world. Notably though, it wasn't powered by the Heart of Lorkhan at this time, so it wasn't quite as powerful as it could have been. Could it be that was Kagrenzel's real purpose? This was Kagrenac City, where he was storing his great godlike weapon. This notion would explain why the cave is so large and why such a unique security system was used, but it still wouldn't answer the question of what those bones were, or why we were allowed to pass the security check. I mean, we are dragonborn, but the Dwemer wouldn't have cared about that, would they have? The Way of the Voice, or our ability to dragon shout, is actually considered a type of tonal magic. Think about it, we're manipulating conditions in the world through sound, rather than normal magic. Maybe the orb sensed our recognition of tonal magic to some degree, and thought that was acceptable. Sadly, due to just the sheer lack of content and evidence within the Kagrenzel dungeon, we can't really be sure. Whether this place was named Music City or the City of Kagrenac is unclear, and either remains a strong possibility. Furthermore, with so many undefined variables, it's difficult to assess what exactly was going on, though if those names hold up, it must have been something important. Whatever this place was truly used for, a gigantic flying whale farm, Kagrenac's personal house, or a center of tonal studying, well, only the dwarves knew, and the dwarves are all gone. And thus, this is where we are going to wrap up today's video. Thanks so much for stopping by, everybody. What do you think was going on here? Do you find these theories acceptable, or do you have something of your own? Leave a comment down below. As always, like ratings are very much appreciated. Again, thanks for watching, and I hope to catch you all in my next video. Peace out, everyone.